Everybody with Angela Williamson is made possible by Fireheart Pictures and viewers like you. Thank you. One of the major reasons people go to Disneyland is to meet their favorite Disney character. Children and adults alike love these characters, and you can experience long lines just to take a photo with your favorite one. Disney calls these characters cast members, and in 1955 these cast members were real. When Disneyland opened, it handpicked true-to-life characters for their amazing backgrounds. Tonight, we'll talk with an author who has interviewed over 700 of these true-to-life characters. I'm so happy you're joining us.
From Los Angeles, this is KLCS PBS. Welcome to Everybody with Angela Williamson, an innovation, arts, education, and public affairs program. Everybody with Angela Williamson is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for being our guest. In fact, during the teaser, I talked about this book, The 55ers.
The Pioneers Who Settled Disneyland.
Thank you. But you also brought another book.
I did. I have my brand new book called Shooting Columbo, The Lives and Deaths of TV's Rumpled Detective, about the TV show Columbo.
Okay, we're going to talk about both of those in a minute. But before we do, I want just to get to know you. Oh. And why do you choose these subjects? I mean, what brought David to these points where you're writing these fantastic books?
Well, that's what I am. I'm a journalist and storyteller. It's what I love to do. And the subjects I choose, this is now my 8th book, and it's because of the types of books that I want to read but don't exist yet. For me, if I'm going to spend 5-6 years researching a topic to find out everything there is that hasn't been revealed yet on a particular movie or celebrity or TV show or theme park, it's going to be things that no one's talked about before that I've always wondered about. And that's every single book I've ever done. That's how it started. It's like, I want to read this book. It doesn't exist. I better write it myself.
Oh my goodness. And I love that, especially when we first started, when I started the teaser talking about this book about Disneyland. I mean, I did not know that, because we go to Disneyland, we see our favorite characters and sometimes new characters that have been invented over the last 10 or so years. Don't realize that Disney started with real people that they consider characters. When you interviewed, and I said 700, over 700, correct?
Well, over the years, I've interviewed probably closer to 2,000. But probably the book talks about over 700 original employees of Disneyland. And when Disneyland first opened in 1955, you couldn't meet Mickey Mouse. They didn't. Walt Disney didn't even want him walking around because they didn't know if Disneyland was going to make it. So they didn't want to tie the fate of their most important asset to this potentially sinking ship. So they said, well, you could use like Tinkerbell and Dumbo would be, because they were less marketable characters. And then as time went on, then you started having the walk-around characters who you could pose with. But that was no such thing when Disneyland opened in 1955.
Wow. And so from your research, they decide they're going to open Disneyland and they will have all these people coming. How do they decide to choose cast members? How do they decide that? Just based on California, the Wild West, things like that, or things around Anaheim? How do they choose those characters?
Well, with the Disney company, they had never before Disneyland had a personal customer service business before. Everything else that they did previously, television shows, movies, cartoons, records, they sort of produced and then gave to a middleman to actually market it and present it to the public. Or they'd license out their character, but they didn't have any direct contact to the public until Disneyland. So it was a different sort of hiring. Before it was all movie people, and in fact Disneyland was created by his movie people. That was the whole idea for Disneyland, to make a movie that people could visit and be part of themselves. So he went out thinking, okay, people are going to expect this to be as authentic as possible. I'm giving them the jungle. I'm giving them the Old West. I'm giving them the land of tomorrow and the land of, fantasy cartoons. They're going to expect it to be authentic. And that was his decree to the people who hired for Disneyland, was make this as authentic as possible. Back in 1955, everyone who worked in Frontierland, they were real cowboys. Those were people who grew up riding horses and roping cattle in Wyoming or Colorado, or they were movie cowboys, people who knew how to ride and were used to wearing chaps and riding in a saddle. The Indian village originally, all 100% Native Americans from the reservation. They weren't pretending back in 1955 like a lot of the people who did even the Peter Pan attraction, which you get in this flying boat in Fantasyland. A lot of those were Marines from the El Toro Marine Base who were pilots who were looking for a part-time gig and hooked up at Disneyland, and they got to fly boats instead of planes or helicopters. One of the very first ones was, I don't know if any of your audience remember Captain Max from the 1960s, who was the first Airwatch helicopter pilot. And he started out at Disneyland flying boats. So it's, everything was different, and another layer of authenticity.
I know, and you keep talking about how authentic everything was, which is really important to those early days of Disneyland. And so you come up with this theme for this book, and you start reaching out to some of these people to do these interviews. Did you ever imagine that you would end up, you said to today, you have over 2,000 of these interviews. When you started out like that, did you realize that you were going to be finding so many of these stories?
No, I had no idea, and I never thought this. I've written 8 books total, and 6 of them have been related to Disney. And when I first wrote my first book, it's called Mouse Tales, and it's a collection of just funny stories about Disneyland and what it's like to work there and everything you didn't know about Disneyland. And at that point, I had no idea it would turn into like a second life. And it's sort of what eventually led to this book about all the people who were at Disneyland when it first opened, because when I first started working and researching about Disneyland, I was more just sort of interested in their stories, and I would interview people sort of like a cannibal in a sense. I regret to think back, and that I sort of wasn't so much interested in them as a person, I hate to say, but like what stories, what juicy tidbits can they give me that I could put into this book. And it was only years later that I realized, oh my gosh, I've sort of stolen their stories. They're not stolen, but I've publicized them and credited them, but have never really talked about their life and their experience of what they had to go through at Disneyland, especially those who were there in the beginning and basically invented Disneyland. And then a few years ago, I noticed them one by one all start passing away, and that's when this book occurred to me, is I need to pay tribute to those really unique individuals who were there in the beginning, and just it became a race against time to catch the people before they left us. And so many of the people I interviewed, it was the only time they've ever been interviewed about their time at Disneyland in their lives, and just how thankful I was to be able to be someone who had a way to save their stories and preserve them for us all.
Well, and Disneyland, when I was even researching how to write the teaser, there are so many people, they love Disneyland. They are fanatics when it comes to Disneyland. And it doesn't matter. It's not as if there are 2, 3, 4, 10, or 12. These are people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who love Disneyland. And so my question to you would be, when you started researching these stories, which of these stories you found the most fascinating, and can you share a few with us? Oh,
absolutely. Well, in the beginning with my first book, Mouse Tales, the ones that most appealed to me were the crazy stories, because that was the theme of the book, was how crazy things were. And now Disney has grown into this gigantic company with 1 million lawyers, and not nearly as much crazy stuff happens these days as it used to. But back when Disneyland first opened in the 50s, and then in the wilder 60s and 70s, the cast members would do pranks on each other, and the guests, they do pranks on the guests. There was one person was bored one day working the rafts, and so he decided, just as a gag, to introduce the trash can ride. And he moved the trash can on the keelboat dock to the edge of the dock, and while the boat was out, if people would come up who looked extra gullible, they'd ask, oh, well, what ride is this? And he'd go, well, this is the can ride. And he'd have them climb into the can and just kind of sit there in the can as the other boats went by and the people pointing and laughing at this man standing in a trash can. And, fun stuff like that. And, funny things the characters would do. And that's really how I started with the crazy stories. And then it became the more heartwarming tales, and then getting to know more of who these people really were, and the people who opened Disneyland, and just had some very difficult stories, and a full range, because everything that happens in real life has happened at Disneyland as well.
Well, and you talk about real life. It sounds like, because just like you, I've never worked for Disneyland or Disney, but it sounds like these early members that worked there, cast members who worked for Disneyland, it sounded like they were more like a family. Did you feel that way?
Gosh.
And can you share?
There's no better description, because they were starting this brand new thing that no one had ever done before, and they were given great responsibility. Disney impressed upon them, we don't know what we're doing. We usually know everything, we know all the answers. We don't. Please help us. And that's one reason why they had all these experts and authentic people to run all the shops and restaurants and service facilities, because Disney didn't know what they were doing. And so these people didn't know if the company was going to make it, so they really bonded. And it was, in a sense, one of the most diverse and least diverse places ever, 1955 Disneyland, in that it was so strictly cast. Everybody in every role had to be a certain gender, a certain beauty level, a certain ethnicity, a certain height. Everybody was a certain age group. Everybody was cast in a role, because Walt figured this is a movie. And so all my ticket sellers, they're all going to be women, hopefully all pretty young ladies who are in college. We'll have to get some housewives too, or we'll have nobody to work during the weekdays, but we'll have that. And then all the people who worked all the rides were all men, because they're pressing the buttons and such like that, except for the TWA Rocket to the Moon, which had stewardesses to the sky. So those were the women who, so everything was cast exactly. But the department lines didn't hold back the relationships that they formed together. They were all in this together. They didn't know if Disneyland was still going to be open by the end of the year. So it was like, war comrades. And so everybody, no matter what their ethnicity or age or gender or where they were from or what language they spoke, that didn't matter. They were all brothers and sisters at Disneyland.
That is a wonderful way to finish our first segment together. We're going to talk a little bit more about this book, and then we want to transition to your other book. And you stay with us and come back to hear more of my conversation with David.
Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. I'm going to continue my conversation with our friend David. We left off talking about those early days of Disneyland. He brought another book about Columbo. We are going to talk about that in this segment. David, thank you so much that was such a wonderful first segment, and just those ins and outs and learning something new about Disneyland. So my question is, what was the big takeaway from this one book? Because you've written several books about Disneyland.
Well, my main takeaway with this book, for me at least, was gratitude. Gratitude that I got a chance to make famous in my own way these unsung heroes of Disneyland, these people who you may know their faces or their costumes, but nobody ever knew their names or the real stories and what was behind them before, and a chance to share their stories and their lives with other people, and that I was able to find so much information and great stories about each one of them. And for some of them, even got to celebrate it with me. Quite a few passed beforehand, but a number, there's probably about 75 original Disneyland employees still alive. Many of them I was able to interview and have been able to share the book with. We had a big party when the book came out with a bunch of special guests. Many of the original Mouseketeers, the Mickey Mouse Club, appeared at the opening of Disneyland in the parade and performed. So I was able to get Bobby and Sharon and a couple others to come to the party, as well about 20 original cast members. And there was one who was one of the original cowboys of Frontierland, who used to do stunt shows. You know, we'd fall off the Golden Horseshoe Saloon after being shot by Captain Lucky. And he was so excited to come to the party, and he didn't make it. And I found out that he had come down ill that morning and passed like 2 days later. And I was so sad and disappointed that he didn't get his chance, his day in the sun. But his daughter called me and said, you know what, just having someone to listen to his stories and to carry them on and be able to share them with others, they were just fortunate for that.
And that story is so touching, and it brings me to, I know I said we were going to move on, but it brings me to my last question is, in your personal opinion, why do you think the history of Disneyland is so important to every person in California? Because we celebrate this place. Why is the history so important?
We've all grown up with Disneyland. It's different for the people in 1955 because they were, at first, for many of them, it was just a job, like working at a circus. When they got hired, they didn't know what they were in for, and then quickly they realized, oh, this is something different. This is not the county fair. This is, 10 layers beyond that. And that's where they made, so many of them met their spouses, where they started families, where they met their best friends for the rest of their lives. It became, I would guess that 95% of the people I interviewed, their experience at Disneyland was the greatest time of their life, even for people who only worked there just that first year. And it stayed with them forever. And now for people like you and I who weren't there in the beginning, but get to visit it all the time and get to grow up with it and see it change, yet still remain the same in a sense, that Main Street's still the same. Even though they made a lot of changes, it's still pretty much the same Main Street, and the Jungle Cruise is still there, and the cast members and the gate and the, so it's so similar, yet so fresh and different, and we've seen it change. And then we take our own children there, and then maybe we don't, through our eyes, enjoy that parade quite as much as we used to when we were their age, but we enjoy it doubly watching their eyes. I remember watching the Main Street Electrical Parade with my kids when they were just little, sitting on the curb and just watching them, just with their eyes so big. And so it's become just such an important part of our lives that whenever something changes now, people get extra excited or extra upset because it's something a little bit different from the way they knew it and grew up with.
And I agree with everything you just said, and I'm sure our viewers agree with that as well. It's taking what we've loved and what we've experienced in our youth and spreading it on to our children and the next generation, and seeing that magic in their eyes. That's something that Disney does for every child. So this book, thank you so much for talking about this book. But we cannot end our time together, or I may get in trouble from some people in my household if we don't talk about your one book you surprised me and brought with you today. So how do we move from talking about Disneyland to talking about one of TV's most famous detectives?
Well, what had happened with that is it seems odd, but when I grew up in Orange County, and my loves were old movies and television and Disneyland. And so I first started writing about Disneyland, and then when this book was winding down, I thought, you know what, I want to try something totally different. And my favorite TV show growing up was Columbo. It was my mom's favorite show too. It was on Sunday nights, about every third or fourth Sunday, on after The Wonderful World of Disney. And since we only had one TV in the house, so it always stayed on the same channel. So Wonderful World of Disney turned into The Wonderful World of Columbo, and I'd always wanted to know what it was like behind the scenes, making the program. I had heard through different articles in TV Guide that Peter Falk, the star, could be a little difficult, a little high maintenance, but never any details. And I always wondered, how did they do that? How did they come up with the ideas, the mysteries, the clues, and especially how did they put it all together, and what was Peter Falk like to work with? And that's where the idea for the book came from.
Well, and it was written so cleverly. I mean, it was clever, and you really had to have your wits about you when you watched it. So how does David start researching a project like this? Where do you start first?
Well, what had happened is the book has just come out, but it could have taken much longer if not for the pandemic, because so many of the people I interviewed who worked on the show are still active in show business, producing and directing and writing. And I'm fairly certain if there was no pandemic, they would have been on a set somewhere too busy to talk to me. But suddenly they're trapped in their house with nothing to direct and nothing to produce. And
nothing to write.
So they took my calls, and all of them said, sure, I'll share what it was like back in those days. And so I was able to interview many people who worked on the show and knew Peter Falk personally, and as well, most of the people I would have liked to have spoken to, but who had passed on in years. Many of them had donated their personal papers to UCLA or Boston University, American Film Institute, the Academy Library, and different places. So all their production reports, all their scripts, everything, all the paperwork, all their diary notes, everything was kept in these research institutions that nobody else has thought to look at and share the true story of Columbo before.
Well, you mentioned that you had heard some things about our main actor, Peter Falk, and you went in and looked at all these papers. Were you proven right?
Well, I was sort of.
Sort of.
In that what I didn't know is Peter Falk was Columbo. He was the character exactly in real life. He was absent-minded, he was forgetful, he was sort of shy and bumbling. Yes. He was a slob, he was easily distracted, he was very curious. He let people think he was this, not all that, but he was razor sharp. Oh my gosh, he was brilliant, and nobody would suspect it just from talking, because he was so down to earth and so innately likable and lovable. Everybody who met with him, almost everybody who worked with him, just instantly loved him. But he was also a high-powered movie star, so you've got that pulling at him too. So he had a little faint touch of Columbo villain in him too, in that he wanted to protect the show, and he viewed himself as, I have the power to make sure I get the best scripts, to make sure I get the best directors, to make sure I get more money, to make sure. So there was a lot of drama, most of it caused by him, mostly in the effort to make sure he had the greatest show ever made.
And I'm shocked that he had so much power back then, because a lot of times those early shows, they were so controlled by the studio. So how did he get this power? Is he the reason why Columbo exists? Did he pitch the idea, or is it just because he made it so famous and so popular?
It's because he was Columbo and Columbo was him. They just couldn't imagine anybody but Peter Falk in the role, because when it first started, he didn't invent the character, and in the first pilot episode, he just played it as an actor, and he plays it kind of low-key according to the script, and he doesn't have all the Well, one more thing. You know, all the wonderful mannerisms you love are missing from that pilot because it's Columbo without Peter Falk investing himself into it. And once it became a series, that's when he started pouring more and more and more of himself, and when people started falling more and more in love with the character, and where over the course of several years, the studio reluctantly had to cede him a little more power to get him to come back and do another season. It was one of the highest rated shows on NBC, even though it was only on once every 4 weeks. But they had to make him happy, and by giving him more power.
Well, and you mentioned it was only on once every 4 weeks. Was that typical of a show in those early days of television?
No, it was fairly rare, but not totally unusual. It was a thing they called the wheel. It was invented in the late 60s by Universal Studios for some of their shows, typically for NBC, in which they had these concepts that were either too expensive to do on a weekly basis, or more likely they had a movie star who didn't want to do 26 shows. He goes, I'll do 6 or 7, like Peter Falk, who wouldn't have done 26. You know, I'll do 6 or 7, but I'm not going to do those. So they put together like 4 detective shows that they rotated. Rock Hudson was not going to do 26 weeks. Peter Falk was not going to do 26 weeks. But if they did 6 or 7 and then you rotated them, so NBC back in the early 70s had several of these wheel type shows. Columbo initially rotated with McMillan and Wife, with Rock Hudson and Susan St. James, and with McCloud with Dennis Weaver. And then they added various shows, including Quincy with Jack Klugman and others people I'm sure have heard of, based on as they came and go, depending on popularity. Columbo, the only one that started in the beginning and made it to the end.
Oh, I love this. This has been such a great conversation, and I so appreciate you spending this time with me to go over your book about Disneyland, the early years of Disneyland, and shooting Columbo. Before we end our time together, if there was one thing that you wanted our audience to take away when they read, because we talked about this book about Disneyland, now let's talk about this book about Columbo. If there's one thing you wanted our audience to take away when they finish reading this book, because you know a lot of people will be getting it, what one key takeaway should they?
Well, the one key takeaway I would encourage everybody, no matter which of my books or anybody's books they read, is for them to do something themselves, something they're passionate about. There's in life, we've got one shot. We could do what we're passionate about or what the world demands of us, and to try and get those two to collide somehow and create something that both the world demands and that you're passionate about, life will be so much better.
David, thank you so much for using your passion to not only educate us, but to motivate us to get us out there to do our own passions as well. Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Everybody with Angela Williamson. Viewers like you make this show possible. Join us on social media to continue this conversation. Good night and stay well.